As you can see from the handouts, the quality of the print of some of the articles, it can be challenging to read the thing. And then when you read some of them, it's also challenging because they were written in the forms of speech of 1880s, no commas, a lot of not the punctuation. So it's right on and on and on. And you find that if you really want to understand it, you have to rephrase it in modern English. So that's part of the challenge. We're going to talk today about the Oyster Wars of Dorchester County. I'm starting out not in Dorchester County because I want to see how it goes. Because there's always a risk in history of inadvertently insulting someone's family for family tradition. And so, what we read in the newspaper, of course, true. I mean, how can they lie? So the stories that we're going to be talking about today are a little bit about what went on in the waters of Dorchester County. Armed with big egos and generous expense accounts, the war correspondents from the big New York newspapers would come down to Cambridge. Some of them might go out on patrol to gather information. Others of them probably sat in a bar buying the watermen drinks and, of course, fueled with alcohol and whatever. I'm sure some of the stories were embellished a bit and as told to the reporters also then carried them up to another level. So you'll see a little bit of that. We'll talk a little bit about that as we talk about the story. I'm not a lawyer, but I need to give you my disclaimer, okay? I'm not an Eastern Shore native. I'm a come here. Most of you probably are too. Anybody a native? Okay, so we're all in the same boat. Okay, that's good. It's good to know. My ancestors
We're all the same skipjack.
Okay, fair enough. That's right. You all came over on mistakes. That's good. My ancestors are New Englanders, not Maryland. I've been sailing on the Oyster boat in the Navy for about 20 years now. So my background is recent, and I'm gonna come here like you guys are. So again, I will try to give you both context as well as the stories. If we try to think of what would an oyster war look like what was a battle look like on the Chesapeake Bay, it might look something like this. Everything was, of course, sail powered except for a few steamships. So, a cannon up in the bow, armed sailors chasing after whoever those pirates were, is probably not an inaccurate vision of what you would see out there. Police steaming into battle. We'll talk about the steamer Governor McLean, which its remains are still in Baltimore. We'll talk about that in a little bit, how that was used. And of course, since everything happened at night, for a large part, or out in remote parts of the bay, before cameras could really be there, you had the artist's rendition of what went on. So a night battle with the police steamer going in to chase away the pirates off the oyster beds is probably what one would expect to see. The oyster beds, you've got that picture in front of you, and this really helps set the scene. It's color coded, and let's see. Darth Vader is my Darth Vader thing here. There we go. Dorchester County is right down here in the middle of the screen. You can see the areas that are in yellow all around Dorchester. The yellow areas are for hand scrapers. Hand scrapers is small dredge boat. That's what we used on the Naked if you went out sailing was about this wide. And hand scraping and tonging took place in the same general areas. The areas in the light green, the bay areas, the deeper waters were the waters that were available and legal for the big dredging.
Could you orient it? I don't know how to read maps like this. So
Okay.
the color thing is water.
Okay,
So it's like the outside
well,
of the land.
the Chesapeake Bay runs down and is green.
So, all right.
Yeah.
Right there.
So if it's not white, it's water.
Okay,
Maybe that's the key.
that is for me to find.
Yeah, that's the key. And then along the sides of the bay in brown or whatever the other colors are where you would find oyster beds in deeper waters. When you get to the rivers like the Choptank is, okay, it's up here. Choptank, is reserved for tongers and scrape small boats.
And where's the top tank, please?
Choptank River is right up here, right on, right above, down the water. It's Dorchester County is right here.
Where's
So we got Dorchester, yeah, oh, yeah, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, about that.
So where's Broad Creek?
It was the chili.
Right, the top right.
Okay, so Dorchester is down here. Choptank River is right here. If we could keep, I don't know if we can.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want
yeah,
right in there?
yeah,
Oh,
that's.
the Miles River, I just like.
Okay, okay,
Where's
Palmer
the-
County, Miles is right here. So the Miles here, here's Eastern Bay is up in here, to St. Island.
Cool, that's so cool.
So, yeah, yeah. So, because so this map shows, further up than on the drawing here. We're mainly looking at the drawing here, but you can see, if this curve right here is the Choptank.
Yeah.
Miles is up above it, got Dorchester County, and then we've got Honga River, we've got, Hooper's Island, and then we've got, Tanger Sound and everything down here.
Cool.
So that help everybody geographically know where we are? Okay, so that's good. I'm gonna start off with a little story. Brush with the Oyster Police. And you don't have this in your handout. What I want you to do is I want you to listen to what, when, where, why. The stuff we all learned when we were working on the high school through the book and high school newspaper. So here's the story. It's from the Evening Capital, Annapolis, Maryland. Says the oyster schooner Martha Moore, that's the Martha Moore right there, or equivalent, under Captain Gibbons, arrived at Canton Hollow in Baltimore yesterday morning. The Moore's sails, hulls, and deck showed that she'd received a shower of shot. A lot of people had shot at the Martha Moore. And the captain's right arm was pierced by a bullet, and one of his mates had a bullet wound in the shoulder. Both men were sent to the Marine Hospital, and neither wounds were serious. Captain Gibbon and his family lives in Fells Point on Louisiana and Register Streets. He said he was attacked by one of the Oyster Police sloops about 11 o'clock Saturday evening. When he was shot at, he escaped by outsailing the Oyster Police to come back home. The reporter goes on to say in a conversation with the Oyster Navy Commissioner, the head of the Oyster Police, Jacob Plowman, who was a political appointee, the newspaper reported that Plowman said that he didn't know what was going on. He was unaware of the shooting, but he assumed that some crime had been committed. And he said that if it's really important to captain the state police boat, we'll let him know. So, impressions. An article out of the cold. What do you think about Plowman? If that's Plowman's attitude, what would your first impressions guy be? Positive or negative? Probably not very positive.
Yeah.
Unengaged, maybe?
Or bought off.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's say that we'll let you know if there's a problem. Shot me.
Now,
Be a problem.
this is in the middle of, this isn't the first time stuff like this has happened, okay? This is in the middle of things. But yeah, he's a politician. First, last, and always. Good thing we don't have people like that. Don't we?
Absolutely.
Gibbons is out there at 11 o'clock at night, all right? Now, most people probably would deduce that legal oyster harvesting would be during daylight.
Were there time restrictions back then?
Oh, yes. Did people pay attention to them? That's another story. That's what we have oyster world about. Yeah, there were laws. They tried to put laws in very early on, but the oyster industry was so lucrative and the special interests were so powerful. There weren't a lot of.
What generated the story? Was it Gibbons making a complaint or someone observing that someone had come into the hospital? Because why would Gibbons put the spotlight on himself?
He would. They just saw him coming in.
Oh, so
And the-
somebody's looking at the hospital and they're seeing the boat messed up
Yeah.
and the guy's been shot.
It's kind of like today where, gunshots, people are killed in Baltimore every other day. And it's just more common sense, unfortunately. And mass shootings, unfortunately, are a common point today. So this was a commonplace incident back at the time. So I kind of look a little further with this. And here's the article on it that came from this is legible. You don't have that one. But, pretty much, and then it goes on to the next day, they talk about the next article down is about somebody's barbershop. So it wasn't like headline news, it was just whatever was in the newspaper at the time. So let's look a little bit at context. The oysters were everywhere, very popular, the fast food of the day. Over 40,000 people were employed in the industry. It was a major industry in Maryland. And, between packers and tongers and people shipping oysters and people getting rid of oyster shells and harvesting and everything else and policing and everything else, a lot of people involved. The character of the fat cat loving oysters was part of the advertising persona. Oyster cans, local and foreign. If you have ever been to the market for an antique oyster can, you know that they can fetch some pretty good money these days. Packing houses and oysters were everywhere. St. Michael's Harbor, the museum is built on shells from packing houses. There were side industries. A little article about somebody's building boats on speculation for people who want to go into the oyster business. Downtown Cambridge was loaded with boats of all sizes. So big boat schooners were allowed to dredge in the deeper waters of the bay. Smaller boats, canoes, were in the rivers. Baltimore was notorious for their boats and their crews. Some of the more savory characters of the underworld were out there on those boats.
The oysters and the oyster business preceded crabs, I take it.
It was more popular before crabs. People still went crabbing, but the main export from the Chesapeake Bay was oysters at
Because there
that
were
time.
so many.
There were so many.
Yeah.
They were harvesting 15 to 20 million bushels of oysters from the Chesapeake Bay back then. 15 to 20 million. Now, 10 million bushels of oysters, and I said that in the last one, 10 million bushels of oysters, if you put bushel baskets side by side, would stretch from Baltimore out into Nevada, out to Reno, Nevada. It's a mind-boggling number of oysters. Today, we're harvesting about 650, 700,000 bushels of oysters and oysters around the country.
When was the first notice of a concern about running out or an environmental concern? When was that first raised?
People knew about the 1830s and 1840s. There was a survey in 1875 that said we are unsustainable. But the mentality of the people was, there were so many oysters that no matter how many they take, there will always be more oysters coming back. They prove that wrong.
Mhm.
And also make just a quick sidebar comment for anyone who's watching The Diplomats in the third session. The guy is preparing oysters and it goes amiss. And so the conversation is, it used to be punishment in the prisons. They were only allowed to serve oysters twice a week because it was considered punishment.
Yeah, on Kent Island, back during colonial days, they complained to the King of England that they had eaten so darn many oysters. They wanted to have more cattle and pigs imported over.
Anything but.
Yeah, anything but. And today, well, over 9,000 boatloads of oysters were landed in Baltimore City every year. So our Captain Gibbons was just one of a whole bunch of boats coming into town. So that makes his story a little unique as well, because somehow they picked him out from all those other boats. This is a little picture of some land that doesn't exist anymore. This is shows a little bit of the Little Choptank River and part of James Island and down into the Taylor's Island down in Dorchester County. I point this out because this kind of talks a little bit about the people in the community. You had in all these little strips of land, you had small houses, people with small house gardens, sustainable gardens, their own boat, and that water was theirs for their oysters to both eat and to make some money to live on. Little pictures like this, some of the names are still quite familiar, local family names. There are a couple of schools shown on here. So way down in the middle of absolutely nowhere, you have these little self-contained communities. So what happens is that big families, so you got a lot of cousins, second cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins removed. You know everybody and their dog, and because you're on the water, you know everybody's boat and who sails on each boat. You know who is working for the oyster police this season, which cousins are. You know who is tend to want to go over the line and maybe steal some oysters. So it's a closed knit community where everybody knows everybody. Then you got these guys from Baltimore coming down in their big boats, stealing your oyster. So you've got that dynamic as well. But the culture was very, very different, very isolated. I mean, we think nothing of going to Annapolis or to Baltimore for a doctor's appointment, whatever. Baltimore at best was about 5 hours away by steamer. If you St. Michael's, you imagine walking from St. Michael's to Easton every day. You probably wouldn't do that. You might do it once a week, come in and do your shopping and then go back home. Even more difficult if you're out in Tillman. So distances really made a big difference and really were part of isolation. The Oyster Police had 14 sloops and schooners. They had 2 steamers and about 4,000 miles of coastline patrol. Oyster Police are the precursors, of course, of the DNR, Natural Resource Police. So some talks I'll ask if anybody here is from DNR overall. Probably not. So, that in itself, because of sheer numbers, would make the job difficult.
And was it environmental? Were they really trying to protect the oysters, or were there a side that they were playing? It sounded like they were good guys. The oyster police guys were good guys.
You had in the Oyster Police, you had good guys and you had totally inept people.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Unfortunately, a lot of the leadership was totally inept. If you one figures which is better for patrolling, a sail-powered vessel or a steam-powered vessel, right? We all know the answer, right? You want to use your steam-powered vessels. Well, they didn't. They used them for other purposes. So here you got and to make things worse, to save money, they were cheap on armament and rifle round cartridges and things like that for these people. But we'll talk more about that in some of the stories. I'll show you that in some of the stories. So your typical Oyster Police sloop is about 20-ton boat, crew of 4 to 5. The dredge boats were 80 to 100 tons, 80 to 100 tons, crew of 10 or more. Deeper draft, of course. But if you're in a big boat and a small boat has to, even though you may have the right of way, you tend to get out of the way of the bigger boat, right? The steamer Governor McLean, you can see the cannon mounted on this boat. There, this cannon up front. There was an arms race between the pirates because there was such a demand for oysters in Baltimore and such a lot of money to make. The pirates would be armed with the latest Winchester repeating rifles and all the other latest technology, umpteen thousand rounds of ammunition. Some pirate boats just were used to protect the other pirates from the Oyster Police. You had all the elements of real war, you know. And you get the Oyster Police who, because the Maryland legislature didn't want to waste money, will give you these old Civil War, worn out guns that nobody else wants, and we'll give you 200 rounds of ammunition. Go ahead and patrol and keep the peace. Okay? So that's basically what's going on there. So 4,400 miles of shoreline, borrowed cannon, and a lot of nighttime mischief went undetected. One of the motivators of crime is lack of consequences. So stuff happening at night, 4,400 miles of shoreline, all these other things, factors. It was easy to get away with stealing oysters in a lot of cases. Dorchester County was featured in natural magazines. And the waterways, you've seen one map, but the waterways were well known, and there are still oysters out in a lot of those traditional beds. So let's talk about the Battle of the Hunger River. The cast of characters. The police sloop Julia A. Hamilton, police steamer Lila, police steamer William J. Hamilton, the dredge boat Frank and Mary McNamara, the dredge boat Martha Moore. Martha Moore, where have we heard that name before? Good old Captain Gibbons up in Canton Hollow, okay? And another one's the dredge boat Maud Bullen. So, if you want the Cliff Notes version in 25 words or less, Oyster Police try to chase pirates away. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. Oyster Police try to chase pirates away. Sometimes they get captured by the pirates, sometimes they escape. Oyster Police chase after oyster pirates, sometimes they chase the oyster pirates away. So those three scenarios are what you'll see in just about everything that goes on here. So, Battle of the Hunger River. The area is still very rich with oysters, and the southern part, you got the Blackwater. Blackwater's right down here. That whole marshy area. You've got villages of Crapo, Wingate, Bishop's Head, and Crochern isn't shown on here, but you've got a couple little villages down here. A couple of weeks ago, when we had all those real high tides, you might have seen pictures from Bishop's Head of a little store sitting out there and the water all around it. It is very low. It's subsiding. It is disappearing. Okay, but it's water oriented, and the area where the battles were, the Hunger River, all the Hunger River, Hoopersville, Hunger Street, Hooper Strait, Fishing Bay, Tangier Sound. And then out here in the bay are where you could legally dredge for oysters. So here's part of the story from the New York Tribune in February 1784. The state police oyster sloop Julia A. Hamilton, with Captain John Inslee, commander, had a hot fight with a fleet of oyster pirates working illegally on the ground on the Hogger River yesterday. Crews of 20 oyster pirate dredge boats laughed derisively when Captain Inslee threatened to give them his broadside, and they responded with a terrific volley of their own, which drove the police below deck. The rigging and woodwork of the Hamilton was cut to pieces, and several of the crew were wounded. The policemen, discovering that they had stirred up a hornet nest, were preparing to defend themselves with a 6-pound cannon in their bow, but the pirates boarded and took possession of the Hamilton after a sharp contest in which several of the crew of the police boat fought desperately. One of the pirates reached the Hamilton's hatchway, and he received a rifle ball through the shoulder as the crew fired from the entrenched cabin. Dodging behind a small deck house, the boarding party exchanged shots with the crew for half an hour. This is on a boat that's about 50 feet on deck. Captain Ingley was forced to withdraw without further molesting the pirates. The defiant oystermen then returned to their vessels and then Hamilton left the creek. Let me just finish. One more little paragraph. Returning to Cambridge, Captain Inslee telegraphed his report to Annapolis and was immediately charged with great cowardice in the matter that he had deserted and refused to continue to attack the pirates. 20-1.
That's great.
Okay, so yes, sir.
I'm just curious about the politics of this.
That's the next part.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the next part.
I guess before you get to, was the oyster industry so powerful that they could dictate the laws that were going to be enforced by the oyster police?
They had a tremendous influence on the Maryland legislature. 2/3 of the Maryland legislature at that time was from the Eastern Shore, and everybody else had only 1/3 of the state senators.
Why would 2/3 of the legislature be from the Eastern Shore if it was based on one person, one vote?
It wasn't at that time. That didn't happen until 1969.
Okay.
So yes, politics and money definitely played an extremely important part of it. Yes.
Just curious, when the pirates had all of these oysters, where were they processed? Was that sort of just, no one looked at that?
The demand for oysters was so high. They were shipping, 20 boxcars full of oysters out of Cambridge. 1 million bushels of oysters harbored out of the Choptank River and Little Choptank.
So they weren't processed here then?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. They were processed here. They were processed a lot of places. Once steam canning came in, you could preserve those oysters and send them anywhere. But whole oysters in the winter packed in ice were shipped Chicago out into Iowa, way out in the Midwest. They were getting fresh Maryland oyster.
Did the processing plants, they didn't care where
No.
they came from?
And once an oyster's up on deck, you can't tell where it came from.
They're barcodes, right?
Yeah, they don't talk. They climb up. We'll talk about that. Okay, yeah. So there's that piece of the story from one of the New York newspapers. Here's that piece of the story from the Baltimore Sun. Okay. They said on Tuesday morning, about 100 pirate vessels, both large and small, came into Tangier Sound, and they 70 of them went up the Hogger River to steal oysters. They came as an invading fleet, firing in all directions and heading for the police boat. Hoggers who were working out there legitimately were driven off and the police were chased off by dredgers, and run toward shore. So that's their short story. Members of a delegation from Dorchester County, traveled to Baltimore to Annapolis to try to get help. And they said that the difficulty down here in Fishing Bay and the Hunger River had been going on for quite some time. The residents on shore were alarmed by a lot of firing when that fleet first came into the bay. Tried driving up the tongers so they could go and steal oysters. And the firing was there to intimidate both the tongers and the police boat that was patrolling the area. They said that two hands deserted the police boat, Julia Hamilton, leaving Captain Inslee short of crew, and that they only had 16 cartridges of ammunition to try to fight things off. So that's a little bit of the backstory behind them driving Captain Inslee off. Baltimore Sun goes on to say sensational reports of the affair were telegraphed from Cambridge to the New York newspaper. So that's where they got their information. And those reports said that the Oyster police schooner Julie Hamilton was boarded and almost captured after a fight with the pirates. So we talked about that. And then they say that Mr. Charles E. Hayward, an eyewitness from South Georgia, said there was not a word of truth in that New York article. He said that Julie Hamilton was surrounded by a fleet of vessels on forbidden grounds, and having neither weapons or ammunition or even enough crew to meet the emergency, they were forced to leave and sail to Cambridge. And the Captain Inslee resigned because he felt his usefulness was over. So, same story, two different tells to it. And they go on to say the statement about Captain Inslee's lack of nerve is denied. He is said to be a brave but powerless to enforce the law, having neither the arms or ammunition, and having lost it so favored the pirates. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much things haven't changed. You kind of need to have two different independent sources to really determine where the truth really is. You know, that's the same problem we have today. But for entertainment purposes, going back to the New York Times, because it was cool reading. I mean, and this stuff was widespread all over the country. They said, in terms of the committee from Dorchester, that they sent a telegram to Annapolis. Dredgers in position of Fishing Bay and Hunger River, stop. 100 armed dredgers at work on forbidden grounds, stop. Oysters ruined, stop. Send steamers at once, but put a good man in charge, stop. Now, there were certainly telegrams sent back and forth between Dorchester and Annapolis. Some were answered, some weren't. The governor, though, in this case, responded. He did order the police steamer Lila, which was I think, Civil War surplus old walking beam engine paddle steamer. He sent that and a new captain to command the sloop Julia Hamilton. But meanwhile, pirates, of course, were unmolested, and they kept dredging and stealing oysters. The governor sent the Hamilton to Baltimore to the state armory to get more weapons because they obviously knew that they needed more weapons to fight off these pirates. And they planned to go ahead and send the Hamilton and the Governor Hamilton, the steamer, and the Julia Hamilton, the sloop, back down to that area to drive the pirates off the beds. Now, I'm not losing. Yeah, I'm losing my mind. I'm losing my place. The pirates the pirates, and this is a picture from one of the magazines, shows the pirates attacking the Julia Hamilton. So it was interesting that this story, as inaccurate as it is, was well illustrated in the national papers. So they showed the pirates attacking the Julia Hamilton in this. This picture really got pixelated, but basically it shows floating bonfires to a oyster bed so that the pirates could dredge up and down the oyster beds at night. What happened is that the pirates were so organized that they burned these floats so that they could work all night, and more pirate boats came in over time, and they would cover their name boards and their dredge numbers so that they could stay anonymous, were easily identified. And they set up a depot on Deal Island to transship to their oysters, and then they would send their oysters up to Baltimore on some of the older boats. So it was a well-organized crime to attack and deplete these oyster beds.
So I'm gonna assume that Nathan never participated in pirating oysters.
Nathan didn't. Skipjacks actually didn't come about till 1890.
Okay.
So this is pre-skipjack days, but the reason you have skipjacks is because you needed a shallow draft vessel to get it to oysters. So this is a precursor to skipjacks. The boat you had back then, you had the deep draft schooners, you had canoes, log canoes, usually one card log on the bottom and 25, 30. They sort of looked like the racing canoes, but without all the outlandish sail. And they didn't have the height.
Yeah, and you said there was like 100 pirate boats. Where did they come from?
All over.
Some of them were organized. Where did they come from? How did they organize themselves?
Well, you had such a demand up in Baltimore that I'm sure the Baltimore packing houses and their captains, who were very well paid, kind of got other people involved in it. It was free. It was easy money, and
Sort of like the drug cartels. They're terrifically organized.
yeah,
Skirt around the authority, and they're in all different ports.
definitely, yeah.
Weren't a lot of the pirates from Virginia area that come up?
Well, yeah, the Virginia pirates come up. That's a whole different part of the war. But let me just read this next part, because this will address what you do. When the oyster fleet came back down to try to get control of the situation, the Julia Hamilton, the sloop, was the first to arrive, and after short skirmish, it was captured by the pirates, okay, and towed up Fishing Creek. When the steamers Lila and William J. Hamilton arrived, when the police steamers arrived, they had a short fight with the Frank and Mary McNamara, which was a schooner owned by Leland McNamara from Dorchester County. So some of the pirates were local, one of the local ones. Because you had the two steamers now, they were able to scatter that oyster fleet and drive them out the river. But it took the steamers. They then, one of the police steamers then went up Fishing Creek and they freed the Julia Hamilton and her crew. Now, remember, you got a lot of family feuding in here, so some of these pirates had a cousin or an uncle on the Julia Hamilton. So you might be captured, they might beat you up, rough you up a little bit, but there was surprisingly little fatalities at that time. The oyster police operated under rules of war, okay? Aim for the rigging, try to chase them away by intimidation. Pirates had no such rules. And there's a picture of the Lila. Lila is in the back, and walking beam engines are, you'll look at old steamboat, it kind of rocks back and forth. The beam rocks back and forth on the paddle wheels. The Governor Thomas was more, it had a single screw propeller on it. Both steam powered, both capable in their own way. But problem you had is if you have a inept leadership of the Oyster Police, it was common for one of those boats to go out of service in the middle of the winter, in the middle of the oyster season, for maintenance. Rather than maintain it in the summer, they'd pull it out when they had to. So you had a lot of ineptness there. Now, we'll get personal. I'm going to get personal here about the Cannon family. Right? Cannon family from South Dorchester. As all the stuff is happening, the first phase of the battle, the steamers finally come in and get the pirates out. The follow-on to that is from the Baltimore Sun said that Captain Mitchell, who was in the command of the Lila, returned to Fishing Creek and he captured the pungy Ward Muller, which was dredging at night. The captain, Sylvester Cannon, escaped capture and hid on shore, watching his boat being taken to Justice Peace Robinson in Goose Creek. Goose Creek is part of Harville today. Sylvester is the son of R.P. Cannon, who is popularly credited as being the mastermind behind this recent raid of oyster pirates into the Honolulu River. So you had local people involved in this, as well as bringing in people from Baltimore. A former magistrate, R.P. Cannon, was very familiar with the Oyster War. And once he learned there was no outstanding warrant for him, that he wasn't under arrest, he went on board the Lila to demand the release of his son's boat. Again, you know the ins and outs of the oyster law, you know how to get your boat back. Law basically said that if you capture a boat illegally dredging, you can confiscate the boat, but you have to capture the captain. So the reason Sylvester left his crew behind and hopped into a little dinghy that was kind of behind is that his crew and everybody would go free. So RP went on board the Lila to demand the release of his son's boat. And eventually he got the boat back and he sailed his son's boat as far away from the Oyster Police as he could. Now his son, meanwhile, is on shore, okay? And he sees his boat being seized. He sees his boat going away. And the first thing he thinks is, they've taken my boat, taken my line, and going away. And I know who to blame. He ran to the home of Justice Robinson because the police really was the one who would determine whether that boat was captured or not. And it said that Sylvester broke windows and he threatened all the women. Now, Robinson is still on board the Lila while all this is happening. So he goes to the house and intimidates the women. And the article goes on to say that he enlisted the help of his brothers, who were no better than him. They were also the dregs of humanity who had tortured crew and doing all kinds of horrible things. When they interviewed R.P. Cannon, he said that, I used to be enforce the law. And he said, I went out with Captain Inslee. We had a waterborne posse of several boats to go down to Deal Island to get those people under control. And he said, Inslee abandoned me and left me to absorb all the shot and shell from these pirates in a night attack. So Cannon said, hey, if they're getting away making all kinds of money and I'm getting shot at trying to uphold the peace, I might as well be a pirate. That's what the newspaper said. Now, you got small, close-knit community, cousins against cousins, baby brothers against brothers. Very small area, isolated area, southern Dorchester County. The tensions were so high that they had to have the Dorchester County Sheriff form a posse to come down overland up through all those swamps and everything and occupy that area for a couple of weeks until the tempers drew down and they were able to talk sense into these opposing factions. Now, it was also said at this time that Captain Inslee and Sylvester Cannon challenged each other to a duel, and that Inslee showed up and Cannon didn't. Now, that's a story. I heard from a gentleman by the name of Rob Cannon, who was RP's great-great-grandson. He thanked me for, this was really an article in the Attraction magazine. He thanked me for writing the article. He said, I would like to correct the story. So I had a real nice conversation with him about his great-great-grandfather. And he said, he was a lawyer. He said he was more than just what they made him out to be. He wasn't the caricature that they had him to be. And he said he actually sued the New York newspapers for libel a couple of times, defamation of character. Never won anything. But he said he wanted me to know that what you read sometimes in the newspapers not necessarily correct. So that's a little bit of the story about southern Dorchester County. So we talked about the cannons. There was an article on it that preparing for a fight, and this is I will read it to you. Yeah. So this basically was from Baltimore. Says that there was a failure to prevent illegal dredging of oysters, and that the Leela was in Fishing Bay, and they talk about R.P. Cannon. It says H.P. here, but R was he's Ross, I was told. Talk about the outlaws and everything. So I don't think that's one of them you have, but to let you know that the stories, that the sensationalism was embedded right in those stories as well. You draw, and so what happens is you get the story, the Pirate King, R.P. Cannon, that would be modestly portrayed in a local newspaper. New York newspapers would get a hold of it, and to jack up readership, this guy all of a sudden is leading a band of 1,000 boats, and they're invading all the country and everything else like this. So you get a lot of exaggeration, a lot of misconceptions about what went on. But the reality is, it was so easy to break the law and so easy to get away with it that the temptation was too hard for a lot of people to resist. And again, the Harper, this battle actually was displayed as prominently as the time as if it was a feature on 60 Minutes. The whole hour being spent just on this sort of thing. From Harper's Weekly magazine, an article that shows the Oyster police with a bobby helmet. Not that they wore those. Mounting the board bullet, demanding the surrender of Sylvester Cannon. So the pictures picked pieces of the story to illustrate for people all over the country what was going on the Chesapeake Bay at that time. So that's another Oyster War battle. Anybody have any comments about that? Interesting. Window on the people, on the impact that the temptation has on them. What wasn't written here was what happened on land. Okay, you're in one of these little isolated, on one of these isolated little necks, and you got gunfire going around you. You got bullets whizzing overhead because they're not just shooting at anything. So obviously you had a lot of upset people that were innocent bystanders. And yeah.
So give me a time frame. So how long did this battle, when did it start? Kind of when did it finish?
This was about 4 days. it was about 4 days, that the events down on the Hun River took place.
But we're not talking about months or years, we're talking about days.
Days, yes, yeah. Now, that skirmish, other skirmishes, you had these things happening weekly over the season, probably from the 1st of November till about the end of February. In any given year, you had these things happening. Some were quick, overnight. Some were 3-4 days, and I'll got another one that takes even longer than that.
But there must have been a legitimate oyster business that was running side
Oh,
by side.
absolutely, yeah, this is alongside the legitimate business.
So you would think a legitimate business would have a huge interest in silencing the activities of the pirates because they were taking away their business. They were undermining
You
them.
would think that, but since you make money with volume, right? The more oysters you get, the more money you make. You might be a legitimate part of the time and illegitimate part of the time as
Okay.
well to meet the demand. So you had crossover all the time. I want to get a little more literary on this next one here. We're going to talk about the Battle of Cook's Point. Now, Cook's Point, of course, is up at the mouth of the Choptank River on the Dorchester side. Sullivan Island, Blackwall Point is on the other side. You used to have Sharks Island out there at the mouth of the Choptank River. So this is about what happens when the pirates come in off the bay into the river itself. So we've got the Oyster Police, Eliza Howard, we've got Oyster Schoolers, we've got Captain Bridges, and we've got a poem written about this. We'll get to. So again, Choptank River, the purple line kind of is the Dorchester shore, and Cook's Point is right out here at the end. We've got Cook's Point, we've got Sharks Island, and we've got Sullivan Island. So we're looking at this area right here. They're fishermen, the airplane wrecks out there.
It's a sanctuary out there.
There's a sanctuary out there, yeah. Yeah. So that, see, we're making messages out of those of you who may not have mentioned was, yeah.
I hope I'm not jumping ahead here. Is there an identifiable year that there was an end to the piracy and the oyster wars? Or what would have been the cause?
The basic oyster wars probably ended the late 1890s, pretty much. More because demand for oysters started to go down. And also that there were fewer and fewer oysters.
They were depleted.
So if it wasn't easy to get to, a lot of people just left the industry. The last oyster pirate probably has not been caught yet because you still have people going over the line. You have people who've gone into sanctuaries. Even recently, some guys will still do that.
Are boats allowed to come along and just take oysters away? And our property, there's a guy that comes all the time on his boat and he takes bushes of oysters down to Tillman.
Yeah.
Is he allowed to do that?
Probably. I mean, I'm not sure where he is, but probably
I mean, so nothing keeps you from harvesting the oysters that are along
if
everybody's.
in the common areas, you're allowed, during the season, you're allowed to harvest oysters. So, sanctuaries, of course, are off limits at all times. So if you're not in a sanctuary and you're during the season, you can harvest oysters. The tonguing season, the hand tonguing season is from October 1st to, I think, April 15th.
So there's a season.
So there was a season, yes.
So the wars or the battles, such as they are not between rival gangs as much as they're a law enforcement issue.
Yeah.
So this is almost like an anti-crime issue rather than a war.
And it's a very cultural issue as well,
Okay.
because Eastern Shore was so remote from the Western Shore, we're so remote from Annapolis that things were evolved very independently over here.
Mhm.
Still is to a large degree. You'll talk to a lot of the people who are 4, 5, 6 generations down here, and you can definitely see a difference in culture between that and living on the Western Shore. Those of us who-
Did the oyster industry take any role or position during the Civil War? I mean, the Eastern Shore, the farmers and slave owners clearly were much more sympathetic to the South.
Yes,
But did the oyster industry care one way or the other?
during the Civil War, watermen could make more money smuggling goods from the north to the south than they could make dredging oysters. So economics drove a lot of that kind of business. You certainly had people who went off to war. Hunter Davison, who was the first, he kind of invented the oyster police. He was a Confederate sea captain, commanded one of the Congress raiders for the Confederate Navy. So you have people on both sides that of the Civil War, that the war or smuggling kind of took place. So yeah, there's still people harvesting oysters, but not to the degree. So after the war, you got a flood of war surplus weapons around. You've got high demand. You've got the economy coming back, construction and everything else. It's primed for all the temptations that led to those oyster war battles. Okay, I hope you can hear that at home. So Upper Choptank River. Cook's Point in the national paper. Again, this is another article, and basically the story is that there we go. The boats that traveled up the bay reported that there was an oyster pirates at work on the forbidden grounds. So as they're sailing by, they're seeing these oyster pirates out there by Cook's Point, and
200 boats, it says.
yeah. Well, actually, I'm trying to see where am I? Okay, basically, a lot of oysters being sold and everything else. And basically, on the Choptank River, Captain Bridges was operating out of Oxford, and he captured somebody out. I think on the he captured somebody on Harris Creek, and then he saw all these pirates out there like Cook's Point. So he headed out to Cook's Point, and several times before he'd gone out there, he fired a warning shot. The pirates would disappear, but this time they didn't. He said, when about half mile off, one of them, large punji of about 50 tons, opened fire on us, but the balls fell short. She advanced towards us, firing all the time, and one of the other dredgers followed his lead, but he didn't fire. So now, instead of the oyster police intimidating the pirates are coming after the oyster police. Captain Bridges says we kept on course, but we held our fire because we didn't have much ammunition. Again, there's part of this advantage that he had. We didn't want to waste any of it. We drifted off somewhat to the leeward, and seeing that their plan was to surround us and catch us in their crossfire, maybe sink us, he put the hayward bow and got to windward of them, out maneuver and
Sorry. I have to get out of that.
yeah, okay. So again, they show a picture of two boats. Now, if you're a sailor, you know windward and leeward, and you know which boat has the tactical advantage in this picture, right? Just by the wind. So what happens is if I want to be in a boat battle like this, I want to have the wind. I want to have control of the wind so I can outmaneuver the other guy, right? So they show a little illustration of two boats in a battle. So obviously the captain, I think, wanted to not be in this position if he's on the smaller boat.
Which is the better boat to be in?
Yeah,
This one has the wind. The wind is from this direction, so he has the wind advantage.
Guy on the right has the wind advantage.
Yeah, the guy closest to the way the wind,
Okay, so the wind's still down.
Is that?
Yeah.
Is that the?
So this boat is the pirate. The other boat in this illustration
Yeah.
is the oyster boat.
so he's being unsafe.
So he didn't want to be in that particular position. But you can see guys on the boat staying there shooting at each other, you know.
Especially if you should have seen.
That, what's from the balance going to look like. So Bridges was able to avoid staying trapped in that position. And he finally got to when he was finally able to outmaneuver them. So he saved his vessel and he fired at them and he shot as many shots as he could. But they only had 3 guns that would actually fire. And one of them was such bad condition that every time they fire a cartridge, they have to spend a couple of minutes getting the cartridge out of the breech. So their weapons were, not only did they not have a lot of ammunition, but they were outnumbered, they had lousy weapons.
Well, I'm curious, you mentioned in the beginning of your talk that 2/3 of the political representatives were from the Eastern Shore. So I wonder how much the police force was a token police force, few boats, few guns, couple of shells. Was the legislature's way of kind of enforcing the law, but not really enforcing the law because their constituents would be angry.
Exactly, yeah. We have to obey the law, but not necessarily. The other thing they would do is they would put political cronies, inept people in key positions to further hinder the police. You had dedicated, brave people on some of these small boats. You also had totally inept people on some of those boats. You had a leadership from Jacob Plowman. He was from Harford County. He was a farmer and he had a cannery, so he had this interest in getting the oysters for his cannery. No political interest in it. He had not a clue of what went on in the water. He knew everything. He was arrogant, and I'm sure made sure that the police weren't at some places where they might have been to benefit his buddies who were supplying him his cannery with oysters.
Sure.
No proof of that, but you could certainly see that the scenario would set up for something like that. So, yeah, I mean, political corruption isn't anything new, and that people with government positions is nothing new. But there was so much money to be made, and so much power there that, yeah. Now, there's a poem that was written about this, called the Battle of Little Chalktown, Battle of Cook's Point. I'll read a little bit of it to you, because this is from the Washington Post. Eliza Howard is a ship whose timbers never shiver. She chases oyster pirates on the rolling Choptank River. And through our heroes, tried and true, who never feel a cooler when they are after pirates on the rolling Choptank River. Her captain is one Bridges bold, a wild and woolly skipper, who steers his vessel up the creeks at midnight by the Dipper. Last week, the captain of the ship deserted the oyster cattle, browsing on the oyster beds, and forthwith gave them battle. They fought at somewhat distance range with pistols and with rifles. The captain did not wish to take too great a risk with rifles. The dredgers fired their oyster shells with dangerous precision, but Bridges kept his distance so as to prevent a collision. The fight went on an hour or more. The captain had his forces locked up below so not to lose those valuable resources. Well, his crew stayed on the way. But he stood forth upon the deck and faced the lawless friskers until at last an oyster shell went straight through Bridges' whiskers. Though Bridges' whiskers straight and sped, it stirred him to a liver, and hurriedly he turned his ship and left the Choptank River. Great Scott, he cried when he was safe and had his force unloaded. Where would I and my crews be had that oyster shell exploded? Then Captain Bridges and his men rejoiced at their salvation. Amen. Well, a man who had a surplus of exultant jubilation. And what of those they sought to crush, to smash, to burst, shiver? Well, they're dredging just the same upon the mighty Choptank River.
Oh.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that is
The neat thing about that story is he followed the storyline. He got all the main parts of the story in there.
Who was the poet? Was it Edgar Allan Poe before or after the rain?
I do not know who the poet is. I know it came from Washington Post. But I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool. It's interesting the amount of interest that these things drew. When I was doing my research, I find articles in way out west, way out in the frontier. There'd be articles. There'd also be advertisements. I've got a couple of cartons of oysters canned oysters coming in, buy them in my store and pick up ammunition for the next Indian battle we're going to fight or whatever, all that stuff is going on at the same time. There are a lot of stories I can tell, and I didn't want to ruin anybody's lunch or anything. But let me just kind of encapsulate another possible story. This was happened in Little Choptank River. Little Choptank River is, if you go down to Taylor's Island, down behind beyond Harriet Tubman Museum, you can see some water off there to the right. That's Little Choptank. If you go up north, if you go up to Horn Point up by Spoken Mill, that's Northern Neck. The water to the south of that is Little Choptank. It's right now, it's an oyster preserve. It has really been coming back. But at the time, that was very rich oyster grounds.
Just so you know, AI says that the author is unknown.
Oh, do you?
It knew it was posted in the Washington Post. It
Oh,
says the
so-
author was never listed.
Okay. So that's as I'm as smart as artificial intelligence. Thank you. Appreciate it. Vote of confidence. So, Little Choptank. You had the oyster police group, the Groom. You had the police schooner, the oyster schooner on the Shoal. You had the steamers, Governor McLean and Governor Thomas. You had the Annapolis Oyster Police, and you had some different captains. Very quickly, the oyster police sloop Groom came upon a bunch of people illegally dredging in Little Choptank. Captain Marshall was in charge of that boat at the time, and he spent the morning trying to chase them away. And then at lunch, he took a lunch break and he went over. He went down to Taylor's Island, Midnight Taylor's Island, Marina Taylor's Island Bridge down. He was down in that area to kind of anchor and have lunch. He also wanted to. He also had some personal business going on. Captain Marshall at the time was in the process of moving. So here in the middle of the oyster war season and everything, he's ready to move. So, he has this little skirmish with these pirates out there in the morning, comes into lunch, and he turns his boat over to Captain Bramble, so the captain for the afternoon. Well, you've got Captain Bramble and a couple of pawners who are really mad at these pirates. They kind of join the crew, augment the crew. So in the afternoon, Bramble goes out on the yard room, shoots at all. They have the traditional gun battle. Finally, when they run out of oysters, Bramble goes over Holland Bar, back down to Taylor's Island, kind of retreating because he didn't have any more ammunition. So he goes down there, and the Thomas Shaw, one of the oyster boats, was chasing him, runs aground on Holland Bar, along with another boat. So you got two stuck oyster boats. You got a captain further down the bay, ready to find more ammunition and everything, so we can go back out. Meanwhile, you know, pirates dredging happily in the bay. That one, you know, captain, the new captain or the replacement captain, Bramble, goes home for something. That night, as the crew made cater and is on the boat with the crew having supper, they hear the boat starts rocking and a bunch of feet up on the board, and when they open the door to the cabin, there's oyster pirates pointing guns at them. Among the oyster pirates were Sam Cox and friends, well-known people, usually out on thousands of dollars worth of bail, so they could go back and steal oysters. It wasn't unknown sources. The names of these guys, where they lived, they and their kids, was all well known. So the made caterers charged the boat, and the oyster pirates had not have captured the boat. They looked first of all for Captain Marshall, because they wanted to kill Marshall. Whoever was in charge of that battle, and they wanted their vengeance on him. And of course, he wasn't there, and fortunately, Captain Bramble wasn't there either. So the pirates said to make cater, we want you to take this boat out in the bay for us. So Cater is up in the bow, steering the boat as they drop the lines. They put the sails up, and the report is that Cater has an armed pirate on either side of him with a pistol to his head in case he makes a mistake. He didn't make a mistake. Fortunately, the groom is now out in the middle of the Little Choptank River. They brought the crew up. The crew thought that they were all going to be killed because they'd been threatened with death. Pirates were 8 men in a very small boat that if you dared move, you know, you had about an inch or two of freeboard. If you dare move the boat and capsize, they put them in this boat middle of the night in the middle of the Little Choptank River and let them go adrift. The crew heard the pirates boasting that they were going to attack the governor McLean and everybody else in the Oyster Navy and get them out of the way so they could continue to steal oysters. You got this small crew of people in this little boat. They eventually made it to shore. The 2 days later, the broom is found down the bay, floating down the bay. Everything of any use has been stripped from the boat. Rigging has all been slashed. Sails have been slashed. The boat has basically been taken out of service. People in Dorchester County, upon hearing this, telegraphed Annapolis asking for help. They got the equivalent of the on hold music from the call centers. Didn't hear anything. So all this is happening on Wednesday. Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Nothing happened. Except the pirates are all out there dredging, and you got 2 pirate boats aground on a Holland Bar. finally, one day, 6 days afterwards, one of the secretary to the Commodore Plowman of the Oyster Navy, his secretary comes to Cambridge on a boat to find out what's going on. Now, the secretary was not the secretary was a decorated war hero, knew what was going on, but he was under orders, and he could only follow his orders. So what he did was he borrowed some weapons from the local Cambridge militia so he could start to rearm the groom, which had been towed back up to Cambridge. He then went to recruit a new crew and a new captain. Now, obviously, it was not easy to get a crew because everybody knew what happened to the crew just before. So they're trying to do that. Meanwhile, Annapolis, can you hear me now? They're waiting and they're waiting and they're waiting. Eventually, well, what happened is that the governor reclaimed the logical boat to send was on a political junket with a couple of Maryland congressmen and some people from Washington, and they used the McLean to take them duck hunting.
Oh, no.
Okay. The Governor Thomas was still there, but that boat it was in a boatyard because they were descaling the boilers. It's on the boat, right in the middle of the Oyster War. And of course, you had the normal ineptness of the police headquarters in Annapolis who were, just not paying attention. So, if you wonder why a lot of people on the Eastern Shore have a lot of disdain for Annapolis and for the state government, is stories like this that their ancestors set forward that help them to kind of develop leave us alone, we're the Eastern Shore, because they certainly left the Eastern Shore alone when they needed help during this particular period.
What was the time frame on this one? The other one in the Hunger River, he said less than 4 days. Or
Yeah, this one went 7 days before there was any response, and took another 3 days for resolution. And what finally happened is that, I mean, here are all the oyster beds. The green are all the oyster beds around the little Chopback River. So it's easy enough to see that if you're out in the deep water, once these beds are gone, it's pretty tempting just to drift in a little bit to get your oysters.
But
Yes.
I have a question from Warren on Zoom. He's asked, what distinguishes the legal oyster boats from the illegal ones? Were their licenses?
Yes. Yeah. I could probably spend 20 minutes talking about that, but in 2 minutes or less, one. There were virtually no catch limits. And at the time, the only laws were wind, gale, sunrise to sunset, and and dredging in deep waters and shallow waters reserved for game plumbers and scrapers. So those are the only laws. So wasn't much of anything. You want no undersized oysters or anything. So an illegal oyster would be one that perhaps a dredger would get from an area that was reserved for plumbers and scrapers. So those are illegal was how you caught it, and if you were doing it at night. So again, warning shots usually work, but sometimes they didn't. Pirates did fight back. Now, I frankly would not want to be the guy at the helm. Not a particularly smart way to do things. But the pictures we have are things like this, somebody's interpretation of how things work. So we can be hindered by too much knowledge that spoil things for us. So again, this was organized pillage. And they would, they would farm a couple of boats, and basically you'd get paid in oysters. You didn't have to dredge oysters. All you had to do was troll up and down and try to keep the oyster police away from everybody else.
How would anybody that sort of came onto the scene be able to see the difference between the legit oyster dredgers and the pirates? Do they have decals on the side of it?
Actually, there were licenses. You were required to get a license, and you had a dredge number on your boat, just as there's so few of them around today. So there was a licensing procedure. The interesting thing is when you look at the statistics, they started off with maybe 400 dredge licenses and ended up with 200 dredge licenses and almost double the number of boats. So people weren't paying any attention to the law. Now, the thing about the law is that the revenue from those laws paid for schools. So, if the laws aren't being enforced, why do it right? So that's basically.
Was that the French influence on Maryland, or was that just the reality of it?
I think it was reality. I think it was just a pragmatic approach to things. If I can get away with it, why spend the money? That's more money in my pocket if I don't have to pay for a license. Yeah. So again, the oyster police, they had few resources to start with, but they didn't use them well. They had willing crews in some cases. They didn't equip them with the weapons to be able to enforce the law. They had inept people who stayed in positions of power, and really made it a very difficult situation. So Tongas were displaced. Pirates rule the roost was a headline. And now the McLean, which had its cannon, was too busy. They were too busy. And, the pirates were on those forbidden grounds, and loads of oysters just went up to Baltimore, just like the scenario from that battle on the river. Pirates had it all organized of how they were going to get those oysters up to Baltimore to meet the demand and to get the money for the oysters. So that is kind of a couple of little stories about the oyster wars and the culture down here. There are stories about other areas that are out there if anybody were interested.
With all the oysters, the bay must have been beautiful. The waters must have been clean and lovely.
They said that when John Smith, 1608, first surveyed the bay, could see down 20 feet.
Wow. Wow.
All over? You see that?
I don't know. Now, I also recognize that he wrote this book, Report on the Bay, to get funds to continue to develop the bay, so it might have been a little bit of advertising.
How has the restoration been coming along?
How's,
The oyster restoration program, is that doing okay?
in the last couple of years, they've gone from an estimated 2 billion to 6 billion oysters. Now, that 6 billion sounds like a lot, but that's about 2% of what the original oyster population was.
So I've got a technical question. Often, I've only sailed in the summertime, but often evening it does.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like in wintertime. You were saying that all of this illegal harvesting of oysters was done at night. Is there wind in the wintertime at night?
Yeah.
A lot of it, if you look at the characteristic of any of these boats, just like a skipjack, have a very big sail. Big sails to capture even the lightest winds. There was a lot of drift dredging, you let the tide kind of carry. You've got on the bigger boats, which obviously need more wind to move. You got big crews, and so they would they'd manhandle that dredge over and let the boat drift a couple hundred feet, then drag that dredge in, and, you know, a lot of back-breaking work just to get the oyster. But the native oysters were so dense that you didn't have to take a long lick to fill up that basket.
Dense because they build on each other?
Yeah, just like Finding Nemo, just like the oyster, tropical reefs. The structure is basically the same. You got a complex structure. You've got oysters growing on top of old shells and things like that. Hard surface. You've got other marine life down there, all in its own little habitat. Things that eat. Oysters are filter feeders, so they take their nutrients from the water that drifts by. So as long as that oyster is someplace where there's a flow of the tide of the nutrients going back and forth, he's happy. And so one oyster is basically dredging. He's basically filtering about 50 or 60 gallons of water a day. So you figure a Coke machine size amount of water that all that green stuff is coming out of because the oyster is filtering it. He's eating what he wants. He encapsulates everything and poops the rest of it down to the bottom. And he spits back out clean water.
When did the oyster start?
Our months are, of course, the winter months. Two reasons for that. Before refrigeration, your oysters would stay longer in cold weather. And reproduction. Oysters reproduce in the spring and summer, so give them a little bit of a chance anyway before you start taking them. And of course, when they're busy, they in the winter they gain nutrients, so you got more meat on an oyster in the winter than you have.
No, I was talking about the diseases that decimated the oyster
Yes.
population. So it wasn't just overfishing, it was the two.
Yes, yeah. Basically, the 1880s were the peak of the oyster harvest. You'd have 10 to 20 million bushels of oysters a year coming out of Maryland waters alone in the 1880s. That collapsed. That was unsustainable, and it dropped down to 10 and then to 5. And so from about 1900 to about 1950, about 2 million bushels of oysters, pretty common every year from natural wild oysters on the natural oyster commons. 1950, right after the Second World War, oyster beds started dying off. MSX and Dermo, two diseases native to the Pacific Ocean, were introduced probably from the ballast bilge water of ships from the Pacific. And we lost probably 94% of the Chesapeake Bay oysters during that time. So the oysters that we have now are the survivors of that.
And what was the disease? Was it a bacteria?
You had two diseases, MSX and Dermo. One was a virus, and the other was a parasite.
Son of a.
From the standpoint of just the whole Maryland economy, you've got oysters, which is a big component. I don't know what percentage of the whole Maryland economy would oysters have been.
It used to be, Maryland used to supply 40% of the world's oysters in a year.
40% of the world's oysters.
World's oysters.
Okay. So between the profitability of oysters, in other words, I'm an immigrant to the Eastern Shore in the 19th century, and I have a little bit of money I've saved up and I brought with me. Should I go into farming? Should I go into oyster business? Should I go into building ships? I mean,
The answer is yeah.
oh,
You should be a pirate.
or should I be a pirate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks to me like the pirate's not the best deal.
Yeah.
They did to a degree. Basically what happened is that you could make a year's worth of pay in 4 or 5 months. So
Sounds pretty good.
in the summer, you do some crabbing, you do some fishing, do some farming, But seasonal, we work in that season. The problem we had is that if I start working on the oyster boats in October, that's kind of the end of the harvest season for the farmers.
Mhm.
In April, end of March, end of April, when the oyster season ends, that's when the farmers need to plant. I got money, why should I go and work in the farms? So there was a real tension between farmers and watermen
Mhm.
over labor. You still have places like Hurlock. Town of Hurlock came into being canneries, both oysters and also for the market gardens, beans and all the other vegetables and things like that. And even there, you've got people who are seasonal workers by mentality. It's not that you couldn't work year round, but the tradition has always been working season.
The Maritime Museum had a very good display about the African Americans
Yes,
that once freed from their slavery, then also had a legitimate, I guess, oyster business.
absolutely. On the boats, before there was equality, treatment, equal pay, or anything else like that, on the boats, African Americans were paid the same as the white crew.
Interesting, interesting.
Because they shared the same hardships, shared the same work. They built respect for each other. You had African American who became captains of boats.
That's interesting.
Last one of the drivers passed away about a year or so ago.
Would they be in Cambridge? I mean, would they be living in Cambridge?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But here's what happens. On the boat, you work together, you treat as equals. As soon as you go on land, neither would think of talking to or socializing with the other.
Similar to war. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that definitely. Yes.
Just a, doesn't make a question, but did the crabs take over some of the area that the oysters lost? I mean, just by
Crabbing has kind of, crabbing is now, of course, what the Chesapeake Bay is known for. As the oyster harvest did dwindle down, crabbing became more popular. But crabbing is under a lot of stress as well. They're a key species. Menhaden. I have heard of menhaden.
Sure.
It's a very valuable commercial fish. My father used to like eating them, and it almost drove us out of the house because they horrible smelling fish, greasy. But boy, all over those omega pills to sharpen your brain and everything. That's all come from squeezed menhaden. There's a place, Omega Proteins down in Deltaville, Virginia, that is so effective at harvesting menhaden. They capture about 90% or over 90% of the menhaden population. Menhaden are both a bay and an ocean fish. They're key food for the striped bass, rockfish. They're
The
key food,
osprey.
rockfish, yeah.
And the osprey, one of the reasons.
Osprey, yes.
The osprey
Yes.
population has dwindled is because of the over.
Exactly. So the rockfish suffer, the osprey suffer, and they got to go to an alternate species. So what do they go to? They start eating crab. So the crab population is down because you got to eat something with crabs the next thing to eat. You give an osprey or a rockfish your choice of what to eat, he's going to pick menhaden, but if it's not there, he's going to eat crab.
I wish somebody would eat the jellyfish.
Yeah. Now, the snakehead, which has a new name to make it more
Yeah,
palatable.
blue catfish.
Yeah. That's supposed to be good eating.
It is, but oh.
And the blue catfish, which is another one invasive species.
I see. I thought that was the new name.
They're different.
Yeah,
Two different seasons.
yeah, two different invasive species.
I've got to wrap up because our recording's going to end.
Okay,
I've already extended.
Lots of
it.